Hey guys, Rains Wall here. I'm a drum instructor here for Worship Online. I also teach drum lessons at Nelson Drum Shop here in Nashville. I do a lot of virtual and in-person lessons. If you ever find yourself interested to want to look into more drum lessons, go to rainswall.com or Rainswall on all social media platforms, and I'd love to connect with you. Today we are talking about stick technique, and guys, this is such a beneficial thing, such a needed thing for a lot of drummers. A lot of times it's easy to know the beats, to know how to play certain things, for that to line up, but really how we execute that beat is really important. Today, for part one, we're going to be looking at some exercises to really work on our stick technique, and then we're going to talk about how to speed those up a little bit near the end of the video. And for part two of this lesson, we're going to keep going as far as increasing the speed, but we're going to also be hitting how to really help out our non-dominant hand. You know, for me, I'm a right-handed drummer, so everything that I do with my right hand is golden. And I really know mentally what I want to play, and it can do it. But for my left hand, half the stuff, you know, it can't even do that my right hand can. So we're going to be talking about different exercises to do on the actual drum set that can really build up that non-dominant hand and really just give you the means to be able to play really whatever you want to with that left hand as well, or right hand if you're a left-handed drummer. In order for you to check out this part two video, make sure you click the link below, enter in your email address, and then we'll send it right to you. All right, let's get started. So jumping right in, guys, before we really talk about how to hold our drumsticks and how we really have great technique, we need to talk about the level of what we're hitting, because that really can just change really how you're hitting things in general. So your snare drum needs to be around waist level, maybe a little bit higher. We always say like belt buckle level. If you're standing up playing orchestral percussion, that's what you do. And basically, if you sit down and you're playing a drum set, very similar deal right here. Kind of think about your drumsticks as being an extension of your arm, and if you kind of just put them right out, right in the center of the drum, they should just naturally feel like you can rest them right above the drum. You're not laying them on your legs, or you're not doing, you know, this kind of deal to keep up. So once you got that, I also like to keep my floor tom around the same level, just because once we move over there, it's going to be a very similar technique with that. But right now, we're just talking about just playing on our snare drum. So when we play our snare drum, guys, when you grab your drumstick, the first thing we're going to talk about is the fulcrum. The fulcrum is really just the pivot point of how your stick goes up and down from side to side. If you think about like a seesaw, I'm not even sure if those are still on playgrounds these days, but if they are, you can sit on one side, sit on the other side. That's how it goes up and down. Very similar. This is our pivot point for how we're playing, and you want to kind of create a T 3/4 of the way down the stick with this first knuckle right here, the one that doesn't really bend a lot, that one right there, create a T with it, and then you want to put your thumb going right up and down with your stick. So it looks kind of like this, where your thumb is going parallel with the drumstick, and then you got the T going with your pointer finger. That's really your fulcrum right there, and you're going to want to squeeze there a little bit. Now, we're going to talk about how you don't want to over squeeze, you don't want to grab too hard, but for right now's sake, let's just kind of give that a squeeze just so you kind of feel what that feels like. Once you kind of get that, wrap your fingers just around the stick lightly. Now, for the most part, when we're playing, we're using this fulcrum as the main source of how, you know, we're actually hitting the drum. And these fingers really kind of just control what the stick does. So they control the bounce, they can control when to stop, or they can control if you want to pull it up really fast. So now that we've kind of established what the fulcrum is, try that with both hands. Usually it kind of feels a little bit not as familiar in your left hand if you're a right-handed drummer. So for me, I am. But do the same exact thing, kind of feel that out. Just kind of naturally, just kind of wrap your fingers around. We always are told, we're just joking about it, don't stick the pinky out. I used to have a drum teacher that didn't have a muscle in his pinky, so he would just always stick it out, but try to keep it in there, because that pinky really can be beneficial. And we'll talk about it a little bit more later, but you can actually use a back fulcrum, and you know, that's where you kind of use these last two fingers, your pinky and your ring finger, to kind of do the controlling as far as how you're hitting the drum. But we'll touch on that a little bit later. Once you get your fulcrum, go ahead and take your sticks up in the air like this. You got your hands looking really good on your stick, and just take them down naturally to the drum and make a right angle, so it looks like a part of a square right there. You're bringing that down right to the middle of the drum, and that's really where we're going to be resting. Don't worry about playing on the sides or anything, right in the middle. And then now we're going to lift our hands, boom, just like that. So now we're up, and then now we're just going to practice a very correct and easy way to strike the drum. Just kind of go down and back up immediately with your right hand. This is what it looks like. Now give it a try with your left hand. Now we call this like a piston stroke, some sort of up and down motion. The reason that we call it a piston stroke is because it starts up, goes down, just like a piston, I guess, does. I don't really know what pistons look like exactly, but I trust that they start up, they go down, and then they end up. And the reason we do this is from the start is because this technique right here will really help you when you start to increase your speed. It helps you get the stick out of the way so the other stick can also hit next, and you're not getting all jumbled up just playing on top of each other. But it also really helps when you play your toms as well as your cymbals to really pull out the sound of your drums. But when you really use that rebound and you pull it back out of the way, it can kind of just really help with all that. And when you're also getting this technique down, what it does is when you pull it up, it allows you to use these wrist muscles, which really, or kind of helps you work those out a little bit more. So when you do get to a spot when you're able to play a little bit faster, it'll be easier for you to execute that as well. So the first thing I always start with is just 8 on a hand. That's literally just 8 hits on each hand. This is what that sounds like. So now that we've established the wrist motion of playing, just a simple note on the snare drum, now let's bring in this fingers aspect. So basically we're talking about these 3 fingers right here. And those really kind of control what the stick does, specifically with the bounce. So now we're going to talk about doing a double stroke roll. Double stroke roll is literally just hitting it twice on each hand. 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. It's a super simple rudiment, but also we're going to talk about how it should look just technique-wise, because there's a lot of ways to do that. Right now we're going to talk about not using the bounce. We're not going to just squeeze here and do. We're not going to try to just get that bounce. We're actually going to muscle it out because it'll also help develop these muscles even further. For the double stroke, after your initial stroke, we're going to do a very similar thing as far as lifting up. But for this part, we're going to talk about dropping the ball, almost like you're throwing a ball down, where your fingers kind of extend. You're still keeping this fulcrum right here, but your fingers extend down to allow the stick to come up. And then to really get that second note for the double stroke, we're going to snap them up like that. So up, and then snap those fingers. So 1, 2. Just like so. 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. Similar with your left hand. 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. You speed that up a little bit. 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. That can kind of help you just get that right feel. And what we're doing, guys, we're actually using our fingers and our wrists, which in general, if you think about it, your wrists are still doing just one stroke. Your fingers are really helping with that second stroke. 1, 1, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. That kind of thing is happening. So your arms and your wrists really aren't getting super tired because that second stroke is just with your fingers. Now, a very simple warm-up to be able to use with this is to be able to do something very similar to 8 on a hand, but now we're going to alternate right, left, right, left, right, left, right, left. We're going to do 8 of those, and then we're going to do 8 double strokes after that. This is just you've probably heard this a million times, but this is a really good just warm-up to kind of get used to playing double strokes like this. This is what it sounds like. Speed it up. As you're doing these, what I would recommend is get it to a tempo that feels really comfortable for you, where you're able to do every double stroke without using the bounce. When you get to that, go about 4 to 5 BPM a little bit faster, just so it's that uncomfortable, and try to stick with it. When you get to that point, if it's too hard, go down 2 BPM. Right around there should be a good spot where you're fighting a little bit to keep it going and to stick with the metronome. So you're at like 120, try like 124 or something like that to see how that feels. If you can't stick with it, then keep going down, and then you can stick with it all the way through the warm-up. I would recommend just playing through that maybe 4 times at once. And if you could do it 4 times in general through the cycle, then that would be a good indication that you can hang at that tempo. Maybe let's go up a little bit more. But basically, you want to be able to go, maybe not at your peak, like your max out peak, but maybe a little bit below that. And then as you go, maybe the next day or the next week, kind of try a little bit faster, then go down just a little bit, then go for that, 160, and then, but if that didn't work, go down to 155, but keep taking that ladder up, but that's really how you can keep growing in speed. Then you take it's a little bit faster, and this is what it'll sound like. Now with that, you can trust that I'm not doing the bounce, but I'm actually still, if you were to slow that down, I'm still using my fingers to really control that. There's a lot of different, ideas behind the double stroke roll. One of my favorite drummers is a guy named Jojo Mayer. On his video, he did like a lesson video on technique, and he eventually did the double stroke on top of like a pizza and like a sheet of paper, because those have no rebound at all. So, but you're forced just to use your fingers and your wrists with that. One way to do that is like find a pillow. Find something, aside of your couch if you don't mess it up. But something that you can kind of hit just that doesn't really bounce at all. It kind of allows you to have to do that second bounce if you want to get it out. But I would definitely encourage you to do something like that. While we're focusing on these techniques, it's also good to note that there are different ways to hold the drumstick. There's a lot of different styles. The match grip is one of the more common grips you're going to find. Now, there are other ways to hold. The French grip, where we will be turning our thumbs up, so they're kind of facing up, and we're able just to play using our fingers and our wrists as well. It looks more like this. If you would even just say there's a lot of different ways in percussion world that you would play, like a timpani, you would play it like that to kind of really get that bounce. In a similar way with your ride cymbal, when you're able to play and you kind of move over to your ride cymbal, you'll see that your thumb, real naturally, a lot of drummers, their thumb will face up and they'll play more of a French grip on their ride cymbal, maybe even their floor tom and anything else that's on their right. But one of my favorite drum teachers that I had growing up also played French grip with his snare drum hand. So that's also a very common thing as well. I typically stay around kind of like the French and the German. The American grip is the 45-degree angle grip, so we're not all the way down, we're not all the way up, we're kind of right in the middle. I might be kind of more of an American grip guy right over here. But in general, these are all ways to hold your stick match style. Now you will see other, maybe like even old school drummers, not always old school drummers, but you'll see guys hold traditional style, which is more like your left hand holding the drumstick like this. That was really just out of necessity back in the day when we had drummers that were playing, like literally when militaries were marching behind them, we had a drummer at the front to keep everybody in step, and the snare drum was on the side, so you literally couldn't hit it this way with your left hand, so they had to hold the stick this way just to hit the snare drum, and then the right hand was good to go because it could reach it. But now our snare is right here in front of us, so we don't really need to do that anymore. We can just play it like this because it's a lot more natural and right here in front of us. If the snare drum was in front of them back in the day, they probably would have been doing that too. It's just that was out of necessity. But then also it just kind of made its way through. A lot of jazz guys still keep it because it does give you a new way to have touch. But today we're not really going to talk about it as much. If you want to learn more about that grip or any of these other grips in more detail, feel free to look me up on rainswild.com and we'll talk more about it. Now we're going to talk about applying German and French grip really to our playing. One way to kind of really build your muscles is to kind of go in and out of both. When you're doing like a double stroke roll, for instance, start with German, where you're doing you're keeping your wrist facing down, and you're doing the double stroke roll, but then now move them to a French grip where your thumb is facing up. Now move back. Now go back, French. Now, what you're doing there is you're not using one muscle the entire time. You're not really wearing out one muscle group. You're actually kind of going back and forth between different muscles, and really to kind of keep up with your speed and your technique, to keep that technique in place at higher tempos, sometimes you have to go back and forth between those two. So if you're playing a faster double stroke roll, where you're playing match and then go to more of your French, then back to a match, back to a French, back to a match. You can kind of keep up a little bit longer with that as well if you kind of go in and out of that. And it also really just helps develop all of those muscles in there while you're warming up. So if you do end up going to a faster groove on your ride cymbal, that's French grip, you're warmed up for that. You're not just ready for anything that you're playing match grip. You're also warmed up for things over here on the right side of your drum set as well. Lastly, we're gonna hit one more exercise that we like to go through just to get warmed up. Now, there are a million ways to get warmed up. There are also a lot of ideas on how to hold a drumstick. We're just kind of hitting the basics, and these are really good basics just to at least start with and then to move on from. Like we said, in the next video, we'll kind of talk about how we're going to apply that on the actual drum set. This last warm-up is a really good warm-up. A lot of drummers here at Worship Online use this warm-up just to kind of get ready. I hear guys playing it all the time. But basically, we're going to be going in and out of single stroke, double strokes, and then paradiddles at the same time. Now, we didn't talk about paradiddles. If you don't know what a paradiddle is, it's just right, left, right, left, right, left, left. Now, luckily, that's an 8. It's 8 hits, literally, just like we're doing 8 on a hand earlier. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, you know, same deal. Now, that fits directly right with that, so we're not gonna have to play any extra notes or not as many. So we're gonna keep them all the same tempo, though. That's the kind of the key. So we're gonna play it at a slower tempo just so you can kind of see what's going on. We'll play it at a medium tempo, and then we'll speed it up a little bit more. This is what it sounds like. So as you're going in and out of those, the key is to make each note sound the exact same. So when we're playing even just singles, that, we don't want to hear. I don't want to hear just your dominant hand. I want to hear both of them sounding the equal velocity. Like I want them to sound the same. Like if I have my eyes closed, it sounds like somebody's just doing one-handed that thing, because we want it to sound the same. Now let's take up the speed just a little bit. 1, 2, 3, go. Take it up in increments once you get more comfortable, you know, just 2 or 3 BPM, maybe 4 or 5 BPM if you feel really good. And then get to that point where it's really burning and it's hard, and then maybe you go a little bit below that, and then just keep practicing at that tempo. And this is what that sounds like at a faster tempo. All right, so now we have hit a few key points that we really need to focus on with developing our stick technique. Whether you're playing slow just on a pad or fast around a kit, you know, it's really good to have that right technique. You know, we've talked about how as you increase in speed, it's harder to keep that right technique going. A lot of times technique kind of breaks down at that point. So now our focus is kind of going to be like how we can keep that right technique as we keep going. Now this video can't be, you know, extremely long. It has to be a certain amount of time. So we basically put in what we felt was important for that as you develop your stick technique. Now, going through these exercises, you probably noticed that one of your hands is a little bit weaker than the other. Yeah, for me, it's my left hand. Like I'm a right-handed drummer, so my left hand is not completely there as far as like my right hand goes. So this part 2 video that we're moving into is going to be talking about more how we can grow our non-dominant hand so it can be just as strong and capable really as our dominant hand. There's a lot of ways to be able to apply that onto the drum set, and we're going to move into that next. All right, go ahead and click that link below in the description, put in your email address, and we're going to email you part 2 video. It's coming your way right now. All right, now let's go ahead and get started.